Ethan Ward had lived on the same ranch in Montana for almost 20 years, yet every morning still felt a little different to him. The sky changed its shade of blue, the wind changed its direction, and the sounds of the horses shifted with the seasons. What never changed was the quiet. The quiet had become his closest companion. Some days he welcomed it. Other days it reminded him of everything he wished he could forget. Ethan was a strong man with a steady way of moving, the kind of person who rarely hurried. He took care of his horses, checked his fences, and tended to the land as if it were a living friend. For people in town, he was simply Ethan, the rancher who keeps to himself. Most did not know the story behind his quiet life. Only a few knew he had once been married. And even fewer knew that he and his wife had tried for years to have a child, but never could. His wife, Claire, had passed away 5 years earlier after a brief illness, leaving Ethan with a large house that suddenly felt too empty. They had dreamed of filling it with children's laughter, painted a room yellow once, hoping it would be a nursery one day. But the dream never came true. The yellow room remained untouched, its soft sunlight falling across untouched furniture like a memory that refused to fade. Ethan's grief was not loud. It was gentle, steady, and ever-present, like the hum of the wind that traveled across the fields. He carried it with him while he worked, tucked away behind his calm eyes. He did not talk much about his feelings, not because he wanted to hide them, but because he did not know how to share something that felt so heavy and so personal. Still, life moved on. The ranch demanded attention, and Ethan gave it. The animals depended on him, and he showed up for them every day. He repaired broken gates, rode across the land to check the cattle, and made his usual trips to the small town nearby for supplies. It was during one of these routine trips that something happened. Something small at first, almost easy to overlook, that would eventually change everything. The drive to town took about 20 minutes. Ethan usually enjoyed it. The long roads, the open fields, the mountains resting in the distance. It reminded him of why he chose this life in the first place. He preferred open spaces to crowded places. He liked being able to breathe without feeling rushed. On this particular morning, the sun was high and warm, and the radio played soft country music that blended nicely with the sound of tires on gravel. He intended to buy feed, repair tools, and a few groceries. Nothing unusual. He parked his old truck outside a small supply store, greeted the shop owner, and gathered what he needed. As he loaded the last bag of feed into the truck bed, he realized he was running low on fuel. The closest gas station was a quiet one on the edge of town, a place he rarely visited unless necessary. He climbed into the driver's seat, started the engine, and headed there. The gas station looked the same as always, small, old-fashioned, with faded signs and a small convenience store attached. Ethan pulled up to the pump, stepped out, and began filling his tank. He wasn't paying much attention at first, just looking at the blue sky above the dusty roof of the station. But then a movement caught his eye. Behind the building, near a stack of old crates, a young girl was lifting boxes that were clearly too heavy for her. She looked about 14, maybe 15, thin and tired-looking, with brown hair tied back in a loose ponytail. She wore an oversized shirt and dusty sneakers that looked worn down. Her arms strained with effort as she tried to move each crate from one place to another. At first, Ethan thought she must be helping out with a family business. Lots of people worked young around ranching communities, but something about her movements made him look a little longer. She wasn't just working. She looked drained, as if she had been at it for hours without rest. Every time she lifted a crate, her shoulders tightened, and she paused in a way that showed she was pushing herself harder than she should have to. Ethan watched quietly, trying not to stare but unable to ignore the uneasy feeling growing inside him. The girl glanced up for a brief moment and their eyes met. She quickly looked away, almost startled, as if she wasn't supposed to be seen. That reaction unsettled him more than anything else. It wasn't the reaction of someone who was simply busy. It was the reaction of someone who had learned to shrink, to stay unnoticed. Ethan finished filling his tank and stepped inside the convenience store to pay. The owner greeted him, made some small talk, and rang up the purchase. Ethan hesitated before leaving. His mind drifted back to the girl outside. "Does that young girl work here?" he asked, keeping his tone light. The owner raised an eyebrow. "Oh, her? She's staying with some relatives for now. They bring her by to help sometimes." "Seems like a lot of work for someone her age," Ethan said gently. The owner shrugged. "Families handle things differently, I suppose." Ethan nodded politely, but something about the conversation felt unfinished, as if the owner himself wasn't fully comfortable with the answer he'd given. Ethan stepped back outside, but the girl was nowhere to be seen now. The crates were still there, stacked unevenly. A part of him wanted to go looking for her, but he didn't want to seem intrusive. He climbed back into his truck and drove off, but the sight of her hunched shoulders stayed in his mind longer than he expected. Over the next few weeks, Ethan went to town more often than usual. He didn't tell himself he was looking for the girl, but he knew that part of him was. One afternoon, he saw her again, sweeping the ground near the gas station door. The broom was nearly twice her height, and she moved slowly, as if lacking energy. When she stepped back, Ethan noticed something that troubled him even more. She never made eye contact with the people walking in or out. She kept her head down, careful, guarded. Ethan approached to fuel his truck, and she stepped aside quickly, almost fearfully, though nothing threatening had happened around her. She seemed used to moving out of the way, used to expecting criticism or impatience. Ethan gave her a small, gentle nod and said, "Afternoon." Her response was quiet, barely more than a whisper. "Hello?" Her voice carried a tiredness that touched Ethan deeply. He wanted to ask if she was okay, but he did not want to frighten her. Instead, he kept his voice calm. "You work here often?" She shrugged lightly. "Sometimes." "Long day?" he asked softly. She hesitated before answering. "It's okay." Ethan could hear the hint of uncertainty behind her words. It made him wonder about the life she returned to when she left this place. For a moment, he considered offering her a bottle of water, but before he could say anything more, the door opened and an adult called her name sharply, not angry but impatient. The girl flinched at the sound, and that small reaction settled something in Ethan's mind. He didn't have the full story, but he knew enough to understand that something wasn't right. He had seen young helpers before, kids working in family businesses, teens doing chores for pocket money. But this girl carried herself differently. She moved with caution, with a quietness that didn't belong on someone so young. After she hurried away, Ethan stood there for a moment, watching her through the dusty windows of the store. He felt a heaviness in his chest, a familiar ache he usually associated with his own past. He didn't know her name, he didn't know her situation, but he felt something stir inside him, something protective and deeply human. He didn't want to assume anything, but he also couldn't ignore the truth his instincts were whispering. This girl seemed alone in ways a child shouldn't have to be. On the drive home, the sky turned a soft shade of orange, and the mountains cast long shadows across the land. Normally, this peaceful scene would calm him, but today Ethan felt a tension he couldn't shake. He thought of the girl's tired eyes, her small, quick steps, her quiet voice, her startled flinch. He didn't know why she affected him so strongly. Maybe because she reminded him of something he had lost, the chance to take care of a child, to offer safety, to be a father. Maybe because she looked like someone who had forgotten what kindness felt like. Or maybe because, deep down, Ethan had a heart that healed others even while it was still healing itself. By the time he reached the ranch, he had already decided two things. He would keep an eye out for the girl whenever he visited town, and if he ever noticed something that looked truly wrong, he wouldn't stay silent. For now, he didn't know her story. but he sensed that soon he would. Ethan didn't plan on becoming part of the girl's life. He told himself he was only being watchful, only making sure she wasn't being pushed too hard. But days turned into weeks, and each time he drove to town, he found himself looking for her without even meaning to. Sometimes he didn't see her at all. Other times, she was there, working quietly, moving with the same careful, tired grace that tugged at his heart. One cool morning, the air sharp with the promise of autumn, Ethan stopped at the gas station again. He had just returned from checking the cattle and needed to refuel before picking up supplies. As he stepped out of his truck, he heard soft footsteps behind the building. Curious but calm, he walked a little farther than usual, pretending to check his tires. There she was. The girl, he still didn't know her name, was stacking boxes near the back door. Her hair was pulled into a loose braid today, strands falling over her face each time she bent down. She used both hands to lift each box, even though they didn't look very heavy. Her movements were careful and slow, as if she had learned to pace herself after many long days. She looked up when she sensed him nearby, startled for a moment, then relaxed as she recognized him. "Hi," Ethan said gently. "Hi," she whispered back, a small smile flickering onto her face before fading again. He took a slow breath. "You always work this hard?" She shrugged, not in a disrespectful way, but in a way that showed she didn't think her answer mattered much. "I just help when they tell me to." "Your family?" he asked softly. She nodded but didn't elaborate. Ethan noticed the way her fingers twisted around the edge of a cardboard flap, a nervous little gesture that showed she didn't want to talk too much. He respected that and didn't push. "I'm Ethan," he said instead. "I live out on a ranch a few miles from town." She nodded again, her expression thoughtful for a moment. "I've seen your truck," she said quietly. It was the longest sentence he had heard from her. "You ever get any time to rest?" he asked. The question made her pause. She opened her mouth to answer, then closed it again. Finally, she simply said, "Sometimes." It was the kind of answer someone gave when they were used to accepting things the way they were. Before Ethan could say anything more, an older woman stepped out of the back door, giving the girl a look that made her straighten immediately. The woman's voice wasn't loud, but it held urgency. "Maya, there's still work inside." Maya. So that was her name. She gave Ethan a tiny, quick nod and hurried inside. Ethan watched her go, wondering what her days looked like, what her home looked like, and whether she had anyone who asked her how she felt. He climbed back into his truck, but the name lingered with him the whole ride home. The next few times he saw Maya, she always seemed to be doing something, sweeping, sorting, wiping down shelves. She didn't look unhappy exactly, just quiet, careful, and always trying to do more than expected. If someone asked her to pick up 2 items, she picked up 4. If she finished a task early, she searched for another. Ethan wasn't the only one who noticed either. He overheard customers talking sometimes. "That girl is always working. Hope she's getting enough rest. Seems too young to be doing so much." But no one seemed to question it directly. Small towns sometimes accepted things simply because they were used to them. One afternoon, when the sky was darkening with a gentle drizzle and most people were indoors, Ethan saw something that tightened his chest. As he pulled up to the gas station, he noticed Maya trying to lift a crate that was clearly too heavy. She leaned her whole body into it, trying to drag it across the concrete. Her shoes slipped on the wet ground and she steadied herself quickly, breathing a little faster. Ethan stepped toward her immediately. "Hold on," he said kindly. "Let me help." She froze for a moment, looked around as if unsure whether she was allowed help, then stepped back slowly. "Thank you," she murmured. Ethan lifted the crate with ease. It wasn't extremely heavy, just not suitable for a young girl to handle alone. He set it where she pointed, then looked at her gently. "Maya, do you get any time for school?" he asked. She lowered her gaze. Not right now. How long since you've gone? A while. He could tell she didn't want to say more. Her voice had a cautious softness, like she had learned to measure every word. Ethan nodded slowly, not wanting to frighten her or make her feel like she had said something wrong. Do you live far from here? He asked, keeping his tone light. Not far, she said. I stay with my relatives. They're helping me until things get better. Something about the way she said helping me didn't sound like it matched her real feelings. She didn't look up as she spoke. She simply folded her hands and waited for the next task. The rain grew stronger, and a man called her name from inside. She flinched, not from fear, but from surprise, and hurried off again. Ethan stood there for a long moment, the rain falling softly around him. He had seen enough to understand something important. Maya wasn't in danger, but she wasn't being cared for properly either. She was young and deserved rest, school, and kindness. Whatever her situation was, she seemed to be carrying more responsibility than she should. A few days later, while shopping at the local store, Ethan ran into Mrs. Clark, an older woman who knew everyone in town. She liked to keep up with local news and didn't hide her curiosity. You've been in town a lot lately, she said with a friendly smile. Everything all right on the ranch? Everything's fine, Ethan replied. You always stop at that gas station too, don't you? She asked lightly. Ethan raised an eyebrow. Sometimes. Mrs. Clark leaned a little closer. Have you seen that girl who works there? Sweet child. I think her name's Maya. Yes, Ethan said softly. She works hard. Too hard, Mrs. Clark whispered. Poor thing. I heard she ended up with relatives after her mother disappeared. Nobody knows the whole story, but I don't think she has it easy. Ethan's heart tightened. Do her relatives treat her well? Mrs. Clark shrugged sadly. I'm not sure. I just worry she doesn't get a real childhood. He thanked her for the conversation, but the words weighed on him the entire day. The moment that changed everything came on a quiet afternoon, just as the sun was beginning to dive behind the hills. Ethan had stopped at the station again, hoping to see Maya and check on her. When he didn't see her outside, he walked inside the store and scanned the aisles. Then he heard a soft, distressed sound coming from the storage room. Not a cry, not a shout. Just a small sound of worry, like someone apologizing without words. Ethan froze, listening. He didn't want to intrude, but his heart pushed him forward. Inside the storage room, Maya stood beside a shelf, both hands clasped tightly in front of her. An older man, likely one of her relatives, was speaking to her. Not loudly, not angrily, but with a tone of impatience and frustration. She looked small in front of him, nodding quickly at every word, trying to explain something in a calm, quiet voice. Ethan didn't hear anything threatening, but he saw something else. Maya looked exhausted, emotionally worn, like someone who had learned to take blame even when she had done nothing wrong. The man turned away, leaving her standing there. She stood still for a few seconds, her eyes lowered, then slowly wiped her hands on her shirt as if trying to steady herself. Ethan stepped closer and spoke in a gentle voice. Maya? She turned, startled again, but relaxed when she saw it was him. I'm okay, she whispered before he even asked. But she didn't look okay. Her shoulders sagged slightly and she looked more tired than he had ever seen her. Maya, Ethan said softly, do you feel safe at home? She hesitated. Her lips parted slightly, then closed. She looked down at the floor. I'm fine, she said again. But her tone wasn't convincing. Ethan didn't want to cause her fear, but he couldn't walk away anymore. If something isn't right, he said gently, you can tell someone. You deserve to be treated kindly. Maya's throat bobbed as she swallowed. Her voice trembled just slightly. It's just a lot. She didn't say more. But Ethan had heard enough. A child shouldn't feel like her life was a lot. A child shouldn't carry that much weight. As he left the store, his mind was full of thoughts he could no longer ignore. This wasn't just about a girl working too much. It wasn't about chores or helping relatives. It was about a child who needed support, stability, and care. That evening, after long hours of thinking and pacing his quiet house, Ethan made a decision he never thought he would need to make. He would call social services, not to accuse, not to create trouble, but to ask questions, to express concern, to understand Maya's situation better. He would do it because someone needed to, because Maya deserved someone who noticed, because silence helped no one, and because Ethan, with all his quiet grief and empty rooms, suddenly found himself caring deeply about the safety of a girl he barely knew. When the social workers arrived at the gas station, Ethan stayed outside in his truck, watching from a respectful distance. He didn't want to make Maya nervous. He just wanted to know she was being heard. The meeting took time, far longer than he expected. Several people went in and out. He couldn't hear what anyone was saying, but he could feel the heaviness of the moment through the glass windows. When Maya finally stepped outside, she looked confused but calmer than he had seen her in months. The social worker beside her spoke kindly, holding a clipboard and talking with gentle gestures. Ethan didn't approach them, but he waited. He waited because he knew something important was happening, something that would affect the girl who had somehow become a part of his thoughts every single day. Later that evening, the social worker called him. They thanked him for speaking up and told him that Maya would be placed somewhere safe while things were sorted out. There were not enough foster homes nearby, so they would try to place her close, but they couldn't promise anything. Ethan listened quietly, nodding even though they couldn't see him. "Thank you for caring about her," the worker said before hanging up. When the call ended, Ethan sat on the edge of his bed, staring at the yellow-painted room he hadn't stepped into for years. The light from the hallway fell softly across the small dresser and the empty shelves. The room felt like a quiet memory, waiting for a new reason to exist. Ethan didn't know what was going to happen next, but he knew one thing with absolute certainty. Whatever tomorrow brought, he would face it with an open heart. The next day, Ethan drove into town again. Not for supplies, not for errands, but simply because he needed to understand what would happen and where Maya had been taken. Outside the social services office, he sat in his truck for a few minutes, feeling strangely nervous. He didn't want to seem pushy or over-involved. He just wanted to make sure she was safe. When he finally went inside, the receptionist recognized him from the report and guided him to one of the caseworkers, a woman named Ms. Hill. She was kind, with warm eyes and a calm voice. "Maya is staying at a temporary shelter nearby," she explained. "She's doing all right, but shelters are not long-term solutions. We're working to find her a stable home." Ethan nodded slowly. "Will she have to move far?" "We hope not," Ms. Hill said, "but foster homes in this region are full. If no local options appear, she may need to be placed in another county." The word struck him more deeply than he expected. The thought of Maya, quiet, gentle Maya, being sent far away, living among strangers in a place she didn't know, stirred something protective inside him. "Is there anything I can do?" he asked softly. Ms. Hill hesitated for a moment, studying him with thoughtful eyes. "Are you asking how you can help her directly?" "Yes," Ethan said simply. She folded her hands on the table. "There is one possibility, but it is only an option if you are serious and prepared for responsibility." Ethan waited, steady and calm. "You can apply to become a temporary guardian," she said. "It's not adoption. It's a short-term care arrangement. It means giving her a safe place to stay until a long-term plan is finalized. It requires home checks, paperwork, and interviews, and it requires patience." Ethan nodded again, his eyes focused and sure. if she needs a place to stay, he said quietly. She's welcome on my ranch. Ms. Hill's expression softened. Then I'll start the process. The next few days moved quickly. Inspectors came to the ranch, checking the house and the environment. They looked at the rooms, the kitchen, the safety of the land. They asked Ethan questions about his life, his abilities, his reasons. He answered honestly. He told them he didn't plan this, but he felt it was the right thing to do. He told them he wasn't trying to replace anybody. He simply wanted to provide a safe space for a girl who needed one. Finally, after several visits and more signatures than he expected, Ms. Hill called with the news. Maya can stay with you, she said. We'll bring her tomorrow morning. Ethan thanked her, then hung up the phone slowly. For a long moment he stood in the kitchen, letting the meaning of the words settle in. Tomorrow, the house wouldn't be quiet anymore. He walked down the hallway and paused outside the yellow room. After a deep breath, he opened the door. The sunlight fell gently on the wooden floor, just the way it used to. For years, he couldn't bring himself to step inside. Now he moved carefully, dusting the dresser, wiping the windowsill, opening the curtains. He found fresh sheets and made the bed neatly. He added a small lamp to the nightstand, then placed a soft blanket at the foot of the bed. When he stepped back, the room no longer looked lonely. It looked ready, and that gave him hope. The next morning, a small car pulled into the ranch driveway. Ethan walked outside to greet them. Maya stepped out slowly, holding a small bag and looking around with wide, uncertain eyes. She looked different than she did at the gas station. Cleaner clothes, softer expression, but still carrying that quiet carefulness she always had. Morning, Ethan said with a gentle smile. She nodded slightly. Morning. Ms. Hill guided her forward. Maya, this is your temporary home. You'll stay here while we figure out the next steps. You'll be safe, and Mr. Ward has agreed to take care of you. Maya looked at Ethan with a mixture of curiosity and caution. Thank you, she whispered. Ethan stepped aside and gestured toward the porch. Let me show you the house. Inside, the air felt warmer than usual, as if the house itself sensed something new beginning. Maya walked slowly, taking in everything with careful eyes, the kitchen, the living room, the hallway. When they reached the yellow room, Ethan opened the door gently. This will be your room, he said. You can change anything you want. Paint it, move things, add things. Maya walked in and touched the blanket softly. A small smile tugged at her lips. It's nice, she said. I'm glad, Ethan replied. After Ms. Hill left, the ranch felt different. Not louder, not busier, just fuller. Maya unpacked her small bag quietly. Ethan gave her space, letting her settle at her own pace. He didn't rush her or overwhelm her. He simply stayed available. The first few days were delicate and slow. Maya woke early, as if she expected to be given chores immediately. Instead, Ethan told her she didn't have to do anything unless she wanted to. He made simple breakfasts, toast, fruit, eggs, and she always thanked him quietly, as though she wasn't used to being served meals. On the third day, she asked shyly, "Can I help with something?" Ethan nodded gently. "If you want to, you can help feed the horses, but only if you feel comfortable." She agreed, and that morning they walked to the barn together. The horses lifted their heads curiously, sensing a new presence. Maya was nervous at first, stepping behind Ethan whenever a horse moved too close, but he explained things calmly, showing her how to hold out a handful of hay and let the horse nuzzle it from her palm. Within minutes, one of the smaller horses gently bumped her hand, asking for more. Maya smiled, a real smile, soft and bright. "He likes you," Ethan said. Maya's cheeks warmed. "I've never been this close to a horse." "Well," Ethan replied, "they're good company." Each day after that, she did a little more. She helped gather eggs, brushed the horses, and learned how to pour feed into the trough. Ethan never pressured her. If she seemed tired, he told her to rest. If she seemed unsure, he showed her slowly. Little by little, the ranch became hers, too. In the evenings, they ate dinner together at the kitchen table. Sometimes they talked, sometimes they sat quietly. Ethan learned that Maya enjoyed drawing. She used the pencils she brought from the shelter to sketch mountains, horses, and scenes from the ranch. He learned she liked reading simple storybooks and that she found calmness in watching sunsets. One evening after they finished dinner, Ethan found her sitting on the porch steps, staring at the orange and pink sky. "It's beautiful here," she said softly. "Thank you," he replied. "I'm glad you think so." She hesitated, then added, "It feels peaceful." Those 3 words touched something deep inside Ethan. Peace was something he hadn't felt in years. And now, somehow, this quiet girl was bringing it back into his life without even trying. As the days turned into weeks, the changes became clearer. Maya stopped flinching when someone said her name. She began sleeping longer, no longer waking at dawn out of habit. She started leaving her door open, showing she trusted the house around her. She laughed, a sound so light it surprised them both the first time it happened. Ethan watched her transformation with a feeling he couldn't quite describe. It wasn't pride, though he felt proud of her. It wasn't only responsibility, though he felt that too. It was something deeper, something warm, something that filled the empty spaces inside him. He realized he cared for her, not out of obligation, not because he felt sorry for her, but because she had become a part of his life naturally and quietly. And Maya, without saying it directly, began to see Ethan as someone safe, someone steady. She looked to him for guidance, asked him questions, and sat with him during quiet evenings as if sharing silence was a kind of comfort. One night, after a gentle storm passed and the house smelled like rain, Maya approached him in the living room. "Ethan?" she asked softly. "Yes? Thank you for letting me stay here." Ethan's chest tightened with warmth. "You're welcome, Maya. I'm happy you're here." She nodded, her eyes softening. "It feels like home." For Ethan, those words meant more than she could ever know. Weeks turned into months, and life on the ranch found a new rhythm, one that felt natural, peaceful, and surprisingly joyful. Maya settled into her new routine like someone slowly learning what safety felt like. She went to school again, riding the small yellow bus that stopped near the ranch gate each morning. She did her homework at the kitchen table while Ethan cooked dinner. She fed the horses before sunset and sometimes stayed in the barn afterward, sketching their faces with her soft pencil strokes. For Ethan, these small moments brought a quiet happiness he hadn't felt in many years. The house no longer felt too quiet or too big. Each room had a purpose again. The yellow room became a space filled with drawings taped to the walls, books borrowed from school, and a sense of gentle warmth that had been missing for a long time. Sometimes, after dinner, Maya told him little things about school, her new teacher, a kind girl who shared her crayons, or a science project she was excited about. Other nights, she simply enjoyed sitting nearby, listening to the sounds of the ranch as crickets chirped outside. Ethan respected her pace. He never asked about her past. If she wanted to share, she would. For now, he was happy that she smiled more often, slept peacefully, and began to show small bursts of confidence that grew with each passing week. One afternoon, while Ethan repaired a fence near the barn, Maya approached him with a sheet of paper in her hands. "I made something," she said shyly. He wiped his hands on his jeans and smiled. "Let's see it." She handed him a drawing, one of the most detailed ones he had ever seen from her. It showed the ranch, the mountains, the horses, and even the porch where she liked to sit. And in the center of the picture, she had drawn herself and Ethan standing side by side. Ethan felt a gentle warmth spread through his chest. "Maya, this is beautiful," he said softly. She looked down, almost embarrassed. "It's how I feel here." Her words stayed with him long after she ran off to feed the horses. As the months continued, social services visited often to check on Maya. They were pleased with how she was adjusting and how well she seemed to connect with Ethan. She was attending school regularly, eating properly, sleeping well, and forming a stable routine. Every report showed positive progress. But one day, Ms. Hill asked Maya an important question. "Maya, we need to talk about your long-term plan," she said gently during a meeting at the ranch. Ethan listened from a respectful distance while Maya sat across from the caseworker. Her fingers twisted nervously around the edge of her sweater. "Your temporary stay is going very well," Ms. Hill continued. "But you'll need a permanent guardian soon. We have a few options for you." Maya looked up. "Options?" "Yes," Ms. Hill said with a reassuring smile. "You could move in with another foster family, continue living at a shelter, or—" She paused slightly. "You can stay here on Mr. Ward's ranch if he is willing to become your permanent guardian." Maya's breath hitched softly. Ethan stepped closer, his face calm but alert. He hadn't expected the topic to be brought up so suddenly, but he knew it had to happen at some point. Ms. Hill turned to Ethan. "This is entirely your choice as well. Becoming a permanent guardian is a serious commitment. It means raising Maya until adulthood, providing everything she needs, emotionally and financially. It also means being her primary support, her stability, and her home." Before Ethan could speak, Maya looked at him with wide, hopeful eyes. He knew that look. It was the look of someone afraid to lose something precious. He took a deep breath. "I'm willing to do whatever Maya needs," he said gently. Ms. Hill nodded. "Then the next step is to ask Maya what she wants." The room fell silent. Maya lowered her gaze, swung her feet gently against the chair, then whispered, "I want to stay here." The words were simple, but they carried so much feeling that Ethan felt his throat tighten. "Why do you want to stay?" Ms. Hill asked softly. "Because—" Maya hesitated, looking around the warm, familiar room. "Because this is the first place where I feel safe. I like the school. I like the horses. I like being here. And," she swallowed, her voice trembling slightly, "Ethan cares about me. He listens to me. He's kind. I don't want to go anywhere else." Ethan's eyes softened. He didn't speak, afraid his voice might break. Ms. Hill smiled warmly. "Then we'll begin the process." The next few months were filled with paperwork, interviews, and visits. The guardianship process took time, longer than Maya expected, and sometimes she looked worried, but Ethan reassured her often. "We're doing everything step by step," he would say. "You don't have to worry. I'm here." Slowly, her fear faded. Meanwhile, their bond grew naturally. They shared simple routines that created comfort, feeding the animals, cooking meals, doing school projects. On weekends, they rode horses along quiet trails. Maya learned how to guide the horse gently, how to hold the reins with confidence, and how to trust that she would not fall. Each lesson made her stronger, more sure of herself. One crisp morning, while they were riding along a ridge, Maya looked over at Ethan. "Do you think I can ever learn to ride like you?" she asked. Ethan smiled. "You're already learning. It just takes time." She nodded, then added softly, "Everything good takes time." Her words impressed him with their wisdom. About 9 months after Maya first came to the ranch, Ethan received a call from Ms. Hill. "Ethan," she said, her voice warm with good news, "the guardianship has been approved." He paused, gripping the phone more tightly. "So, it's official?" "It's official," she replied. "You are now her permanent guardian." For a long moment, Ethan didn't speak. A peaceful emotion settled over him, one that felt like a mixture of relief, joy, and quiet gratitude. Thank you, he whispered. That afternoon, Ms. Hill brought the final papers to the ranch for signing. Maya sat beside Ethan on the porch, her fingers trembling slightly as she signed her name on the last line. When she finished, she looked up at him with eyes shining softly. So, this means I can stay? Ethan nodded. Yes, Maya. This is your home. She leaned forward, hesitating only a second, then wrapped her arms gently around him. It was the first time she had ever initiated a hug. Ethan placed a hand on her back, holding her in a calm, steady embrace. You're safe here, he whispered. She let out a breath she had been holding for many months. Life didn't suddenly become perfect. There were still school days that tired her out, chores that took effort, and moments when the past memories visited her quietly. But now she had a safe place to talk about them. Now she had someone who listened. Now she had a home. And Ethan, who once believed he would never experience fatherhood, found himself doing things he never imagined he would again. He attended parent-teacher meetings, helped with science projects, and learned how to braid hair after Maya asked him to try. One evening, while they were cooking dinner together, Maya looked up at him thoughtfully. You know, she said, before I came here, I didn't think I'd ever feel normal again. Ethan placed a bowl on the counter. And how do you feel now? She smiled softly. I feel like I belong somewhere. He nodded, his heart warm. You do? Outside, the sun slowly dipped behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and soft pink. The ranch glowed in the peaceful light, the air warm with the hum of insects and the gentle rustle of leaves. Maya stepped onto the porch with a bowl of fruit in her hands. Ethan followed, sitting beside her as they watched the sky change colors. This is my favorite part of the day, she said. Mine too, Ethan replied. They sat in comfortable silence, the kind only families share, the kind filled with trust and quiet love. And as the last light of the day softened into evening, the ranch, once silent and lonely, was now full of life again. Not because of noise, not because of activity, but because of connection. Because a man with an empty home found someone to care for, and a girl with a tired heart found a place where she could grow. What began as a rescue slowly became a bond. What started with concern became trust. And what grew in the quiet spaces between them became something that changed both their lives forever. A real family, built gently, patiently, and with open hearts.